So let's talk about how you might structure section 2 of this essay. So again, if you haven't watched these other videos, make sure you've watched them before you watch this video so that all the stuff makes sense. So in section 2 of the structure section here, I have a resource. So let's take a look at that resource. On this document, I kind of give you a couple of different ideas about how you can go about kind of structuring this particular section. So remember, the section we're talking about is right here. So you've just done all this work in getting us to care about the problem and see the urgency of the issue. And now we're in here and we're going to be kind of our rhetorical goal of this section is going to be to kind of show our readers what are some of the ideas that have already been tried and then kind of explain why those different solutions didn't work. And so, or won't work. And so that's what we're working on here with the section 2. So when we're thinking about how to develop that, we could either kind of organize that section by source or by idea. And by source is when you actually have, maybe you found 4 different sources that really have all kinds of ideas on how to solve this problem, and they're kind of different ideas. And so then you might want to go by this kind of model here by source. So you would basically summarize the sources, different solutions, and the different kind of ways that they tried to solve this problem, and then within that same paragraph explain why it didn't or didn't work. And we do that kind of same pattern for each one of the sources. So then source 2, here's source 2's ideas, and here's why they didn't work. And this model is really good if your sources all have kind of really different ideas. So kind of source 1 had a really different idea than source 2, then source 3, then source 4. And so this is a good model to follow if that's the research that you found. The other way to develop a section by source is if the details of the plan are pretty nuanced and it feels like these paragraphs are getting way too long, break it apart. And so we'd have 2 paragraphs dedicated to source 1, and like one paragraph just kind of summarizes what their solutions were, and then another paragraph that follows that is you kind of discussing the pros and cons of that solution. So why it didn't or can't work, and what's good about it, what's bad about it. And you would just basically break that off into 2 separate paragraphs. So that's one way to kind of organize section 2 of your essay. A different way is to organize it by idea. And this way works really well if you're reading your sources and you see that a bunch of sources kind of have the same idea. And so what you could do in that situation is, rather than dedicating each paragraph to an individual source, you could dedicate each paragraph to a different idea that you've seen presented in a couple of different places. So, and kind of what we saw here where we could do a single paragraph or multiple paragraph, we have those kind of same options for organizing by idea. So we could kind of summarize what that idea was and then explain why it has not or won't work within that same paragraph. Or if you feel like that paragraph is getting too long, you can go ahead and break it into 2 paragraphs. So in this model, you would summarize all the sources that have talked about this idea 1. So you might talk about source 1 and 3 and 4. You know, it doesn't have to be that every source talks about it. So maybe you have a different idea that you saw talked about in only 2 of your sources. That's fine. You could still use this approach. And then you have a second paragraph where you discuss the kind of drawbacks of that. So both the pros and the cons of what was working and what wasn't working. So those are the kind of 2 main ways that you can organize this section, either by source or by idea. And then when you another tool that I put out here on this document is to just kind of start getting to the nitty gritty of each one of these paragraphs. So you have the kind of concepts down here in terms of your topic sentence ideas, and then start thinking about what support could you bring in. So what are your examples or specific evidence that you could bring in from that? And remember, in section 2, we really have to establish our ethos. And so we really want to show that we're credible because we are evaluating this stuff and we want to make sure that our readers agree with our assessment on the kind of pros and cons of some different solution that's already been proposed. So always be thinking about, in each one of your paragraphs, how are you going to establish your credibility in that paragraph? So remember those ways that we can establish our credibility, that are listed on that Aristotelian Appeals document that I linked to in the second week of class. So make sure you come back and look to that. I'll drop a link in here to that too as well. So it's just handy for you to find it. Okay, you guys, that's it. Come and hang out in Zoom if you have any questions. We'll talk soon.